It is now time to hear from our panel of experts for more on not just what the housing affordability crisis here in Charlotte looks like, but a nationwide housing shortage and what can be done to get more Americans into the homes of their dreams. Please join me in welcoming Julie Eiselt, Mayor Pro Tem for the Charlotte City Council. Ms. Eiselt chairs the Transportation and Planning Committee. Thank you. Scott Farmer, Executive Director of the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, a public agency with the mission to create affordable housing opportunities for those in need that are not currently met by the market. Alanna McCargo, Vice President of Housing Policy with the Urban Institute, a Washington, D.C. based think tank that carries out economic and social policy research. Two more. Pamela Wideman, Director of Charlotte's Housing and Neighborhood Services Department. Ms. Wideman is responsible for oversight of the city's affordable housing efforts, including the Housing Trust Fund, which I'm sure we'll hear more about shortly. And then Brian Collier, Executive Vice President of Foundation for the Carolinas, the 6th largest community foundation in the United States. Joining our incredibly distinguished panel this morning is Lisa Worf, Morning Edition co-host with WFAE. Lisa, thanks for being here this morning. Over to you.
Thank you to all of you for joining us. And we have a lot of ground to plow in the next 30 minutes. So we're going to just dig right in. We're going to start with some statistics that you've heard earlier this morning. More than a third of Charlotte households are cost burdened. That means they spend more than 50% of their income on housing. And at the same time, Mecklenburg County now has a shortage as a county of 43,000 affordable units. So how did we get here as a community? And Ms. Wideman, I'm going to start with you, but any of you, please feel free to chime in.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think we're blessed, and at the same time, with those blessings come challenges. We see stats all the time about Charlotte. We get about 100 new residents per day, may even be more than that at this point. So as we already have challenges in the city, we also get people coming to the city who need affordable housing as well. We can't build our way out of it, so we're looking at strategies around not only building but preserving as well. And I love the conversations we've had so far this morning about what we call family self-sufficiency, right? So it's not just about the opportunity to get people housed, but once they get housed, how do we help them get jobs that will enable them to sustain the housing? So I think, just growth over time is one of the ways that we've gotten to where we are with this housing crisis. And I always tell people, like many other growing cities across the country, Charlotte is not alone in this challenge.
Mayor Lyles mentioned some of the long history also that got us to this point. And, unique to Charlotte, I guess, specifically looking at Charlotte, in the 1960s, the demolition of Brooklyn neighborhood in the 1990s, Earl Village, with not very many of those original families returning to it. Ballantyne, which lost the opportunity to be more of a mixed income community. This question to you, Ms. Eiselt, what is the city doing to try to reverse some of these decisions that have increased racial and economic isolation?
So going back to what, the history of this problem in Charlotte, and as a lot of us know, because we're starting to talk about it and accept the fact that redlining had a huge impact on these racial inequities in housing in Charlotte. So I think Senator Newton mentioned it before, and I think it's a really, really important point. One of the things that we've got to look at, and we can place housing here and there sporadically and incrementally, but we've got to address issues like zoning. So that is something that's very powerful that a lot of cities are looking at. Do we start talking about not having R3, which is 3 dwelling units per acre, and allowing, most of our neighborhoods south of Charlotte, which is where, arguably the best schools are, the best housing, those are zoned R3, and we need to be able to have duplexes, triplexes, other forms of housing there that are more affordable to people and give them more access to what everybody else wants to have access to.
Right now, the city planning director has said 84% of the city is zoned as far as single-family zoning. That doesn't allow some of the duplexes, the triplexes you're talking. I mean, ideally, what would you like to see the city do in those regards as far as shifting that zoning?
Well, I'd like to, I think people are afraid of saying we can't get rid of R3. It's not going to happen everywhere.
And when you say R3?
I'm sorry, R3 is what most of our neighborhoods, single-family housing, meaning 3 houses per acre. And I don't think we should be afraid of saying, let's be able to put a duplex there or a triplex. But in particular, it just isn't across the whole city. Let's do it on our transit routes. And I also love that Senator Newton talked about transportation because we don't talk about that enough. The other huge component of a person's discretionary income is transportation costs. And it makes us a very expensive city to live in because we have not invested in a robust manner in transportation. So putting density on those transit routes so that people can live near where they want to go, where they need to go, and do it efficiently from a housing standpoint and transportation standpoint.
And how do you do that? Because with the Blue Line, the city has lost some opportunities with locating affordable housing there. So what is the plan forward?
So the next line that we've just paid for the design portion of the $50 million for, the Silver Line, as soon as we get to the point where the federal government says, okay, now you can buy land with that transportation money, we need to be buying enough that we can reserve. We can't do it right now with transit money, but when we get to a certain point, we could be buying land that we own, therefore it gives us the right to hold it for affordable housing. That's just one thing.
Ms. McCargo, you focus on national housing policy. How do some of these efforts tally with other communities across the country who are trying to really boost their affordable housing and reverse some of these isolation trends?
Thanks. Well, yes, I beamed into Charlotte this morning from Washington, D.C.
And hopefully we'll beam out
and hopefully we'll be able
before
to
the
beam
storm.
out. And these issues, these are nationwide challenges that we're seeing. Charlotte has seen, in particular, an economic boom and other developments here in home price appreciation and so forth over the last decade that has been tremendous. And you mentioned early, and I just want to highlight the issue in particular on the racial equity, from a racial equity standpoint, the home ownership gaps. That's, again, nationwide. That is a significant challenge when you look at trying to figure out ways to reduce the racial home ownership gaps, whether it's Black, Hispanic versus white. And in Charlotte, the racial home ownership gap is large. It's surprising because many cities in the South, from work that we've done at the Urban Institute, show more of a shrinking gap. And in Charlotte, it's almost a 30-point gap between Black and white homeownership, for example.
Is there any idea why that is?
There's lots of reasons why. The mayor talked a little bit about them. We don't have enough time to get into all the historical reasons and sort of things that have brought us to this point. But we have an over 30 percentage point gap in the Black homeownership rate nationwide. The homeownership rate today is as low as it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed, so when race-based discrimination was legal in this country. So we have a long way to go. The Black homeownership rate's never reached 50%, nor has the Hispanic homeownership rate in this country. Right now in Charlotte, the white homeownership rate's about 75%. Black homeownership rate is around 45%. It is a little higher than the national average at 42%. So these are dynamics that are really important, and they do kind of point to issues around local policy making, local zoning and land use, how properties are used for rent and for sale, and what's allowable there in terms of being able to construct on certain plots of land. So that's a huge issue, as well as financing constraints. We've, since the crisis, seen tremendous pullback. We're seeing it come back a little bit. But right now, we still are not at historical levels in terms of the amount of lending that's happening. That has really strapped families that are on the lower income side, that has really strapped families of color. So there are a whole host of issues. Those are just a few of them, but these are not Charlotte phenomenons, not just the state of North Carolina or South Carolina. it is something that we're seeing across the board.
So far, when it comes to affordable housing, the city has focused a lot on rental units, but I know that is shifting more toward home ownership and trying to deal with the financing and ways to ease some of that. Mr. Farmer, this is your job as at the state level, looking at the financing to ease home ownership. What are you finding are some of the biggest barriers, and what kind of solutions have you seen to ease this?
Yeah, there's, I think, from our perspective and what we see across the state, and we are very fortunate to be in a state that has seen continued growth. We have folks coming into the state each and every day, and that applies pressure to the lower income households more to the middle and upper levels. But I think the three things that are the biggest factors in the development of affordable housing, both homeownership and rental, are construction costs, labor costs, and regulatory requirements. In order to make a home affordable, you have to be able to control some of those aspects. It was talked about, land, we're not going to create new land. There's not new dirt. So we have to figure out how to better utilize the land that we have, help control some of those costs. From an affordable housing side, it's difficult for us to move faster than the market. So we often miss opportunities. I think that was one of the things around transportation in Charlotte was there was not an opportunity to move as quickly as the private market could to acquire some of the sites along the transportation stops. We see that across the state, no matter where you are. I think resources is a big issue. The cost of housing, the cost of living has increased at a faster rate than the programs that provide some of the assistance have increased over time. We're operating with less resources now than we did a number of years ago, and we really need to figure out some ways to increase those resources going forward, public and private resources. I think Charlotte's done a great job in having the Housing Trust Fund and having that partnered with the local funds. We use that as an example everywhere we go to say, you need to bring your private industry to the table. They want housing for their workers, and the best way to provide that is to have their investment and their commitment to that as well. And I think that's some of the things that have happened really well in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm. And you've been a big part of convening some of those funds, Mr. Collier, as far as easing some of that burden. What has it taken to do that? And as you go forward and you're looking at, sort of this astounding cost of what it would take to really grapple with our problem here or really begin to solve it, where do we need to go?
Well, what's interesting is, although Charlotte is getting a lot of recognition now for what we've been able to do recently with affordable housing, this is interesting to me because I feel like we've been trying to push that rock up the hill for a long time on affordable housing. And Scott, one of the things you said about the blue line was, that we missed a chance. No, we didn't. We missed the chance, but it was intentional. There were people who were trying to push affordable housing along the blue line when it was in the early development stages, and people made intentional decisions that they didn't want to place affordable housing there. So what it took for our community to really get to a place where we're confronting it is two things that I think one is deliberate, the other was not, but was something that we need to recognize. Was one, we developed what we call the Economic Opportunity Task Force Report, which outlined not just housing, but all of the things that have to occur in a child's life and the caregiver's life in order for this community to be the most economically mobile city in the country. Lots of things, mental health, early childhood, all of these things have to be in place. The other thing that occurred that I think woke the city up was protests that happened in 2016. And although it happened because of a police shooting, what the people said who were protesting was, yes, we're upset about the police, but we're actually more upset about the broken promises that this community has made to us over the years around housing and schools and other things. And I think one of the things that we pointed out in the report and the community continues to point out is we have a shortage of housing, but we are a highly, highly segregated community here. So even where those affordable housing units exist, they exist mostly in areas of other low-income, poor-performing schools, lack of access to services. So we have an affordable housing unit problem, but we also have a segregation problem here, which keeps us from sort of knowing one another, understanding the plight of one another. I mean, we literally had people during the task force report work that we were doing who live in certain areas of Charlotte who didn't believe that poverty even existed. They believe, why, Charlotte is this booming town. Why would we have people who live in poverty? They must have made bad decisions along the way. They never visited some of these neighborhoods and saw some of the things that structurally this community put in place to do some of the things that we've talked about around lack of home ownership and things like that.
So so you are trying to look at locating more affordable housing in these zones where you see that there's a lot of opportunity, strong schools, things like that. How do you begin to do that? I mean, and this question is really for all of you. When you're, looking at land costs, you're looking at zoning. What's the first step to getting there?
So I mean, it's a couple of things. One of it, it's about education, right? We know we will always have NIMBY. So it's really about helping people in areas of more affluence. And we've done a great job in Charlotte in terms of doing some of that education and people embracing that. But who will be living in these affordable housing units? It's also, you mentioned land costs, right? It's resources. How do we deal with the land costs? And either in terms of financial means, or we talked a lot about today about reducing or relaxing regulatory fees. How do we deal with it? So it's about education, it's about resources, and then it's also really about the zoning as well. I mean, we have to go up, we have to become more dense of a community, and that is a difficult conversation to have on a Monday night around the dais when neighbors are coming out speaking against density.
I think one of the things that we're also looking at is how can we use data to inform where units are placed. And so one of the things I'm very proud of is we're working with Professor Raj Chetty, who developed if you don't know, he's the one who sort of came up with the upward mobility study that really rocked our city and said that Charlotte was ranked at the bottom of major cities in the community, the 50 largest, in terms of a child's ability to move upward. And so one of the things that we're looking at is strategies around how can we identify census tracts where kids have historically performed better than the averages, but the housing cost might be a little lower? And then also, how do you go back and improve some neighborhoods? So you don't want to just move people around, although we think that using vouchers is one way, or the rental subsidy programs, things like that can be informative. If we can give information to subsidy holders and voucher holders about where historically better performing neighborhoods are, and they make that choice to move to that, that's great. But we also need to go back and improve the number of the high number of neighborhoods that are sort of segregated off and have all of these diminished access to services. So really, we're looking at a number of strategies using data to inform us going forward.
One of the things that we've seen a lot too is these out-of-state investors. When we're talking about land costs and we're talking about home costs, that have bought thousands of homes and properties here. How is that figuring into the dynamic of, trying to map a way forward with affordable housing?
This is a challenge in a lot of markets, and particularly this one and Atlanta and other places that have had really affordable housing that is very attractive to investors from other places. And we've seen, single family rental housing is one of the fastest growing, that is the fastest growing form of rental in the country. And so this is a significant issue today for a couple of reasons. One is just the access to those same homes for home ownership opportunity for families that live in those communities is lessened. A lot of those investors are coming in with cash, and it's very difficult for people who need to get financing to compete with cash. And so those homes get sold to those investors, and then they're rented out. And so that takes away home ownership opportunity and wealth building opportunity for families in these markets. So I think that's significant. And then you also have the issue of, out-of-state landlords can often be absentee. You also just have a whole suite of other issues on tenant rights and just sort of the safety and soundness of those properties, maintenance, keeping them up, and those kinds of things that are truly challenges. And they're not necessarily the most affordable rental, but they are offering families who don't have a pathway to ownership an opportunity to live in a community near a school potentially, or in a single-family home that has a yard and more space, and that's really truly could be the only option that they have. So those are, I mean, there's a lot of dynamics there, but they're really, it really does have an impact, and it's something that cities, particularly ones that have a high concentration of investors and them buying single-family property for rent, need to be thinking about.
And one of the ways we've tried to tackle it, thanks to the city council and the mayor for this, is, albeit it's a small way, but I believe it's a step in the right direction. In our last fiscal year budget, city council approved money for us to go in and do a for sale acquisition rehab program. And so the idea is that we would work with a third party who would go in, purchase the home in partnership with our partner list, go in, buy these for sale homes in a neighborhood, rehab them, and then put them on the market for sale for an affordable home ownership. And so more to come on how that will work out. The other thing that the city council did was set aside some money in a NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing fund. And the goal there, and we've had some small successes, is where a multifamily, someone would buy a multifamily property, go in, do some rehabilitation, and in turn for some long-term deed restrictions, put the long-term deed restrictions on it and keep that property affordable and also avoid displacement.
And the city has done that with a couple properties so
Correct.
far. Right?
Correct. We've done it with 3 multifamily so far.
I just want to add to those 2 comments, the private market component of it and the public safety component, because we have a lot of neighborhoods that are challenged because there are so many rentals by absentee landlords. And if they don't keep up that house, and if there's illegal activity in that house, it impacts the whole neighborhood, including the people that own their houses. It impacts their property values. So it has this very real impact on neighborhoods that are trying to improve quality of life for their residents. We have very few tools that we can use. We used to have the ability at the state level to make landlords of apartments and hotels register with us, with the police department. We can't do that anymore. So the other point I want to make is the NOAAs that Pam mentioned. That's probably the most frustrating thing we find, is that we can vote to put money into a pot to say we'll buy those if they come on the market. But in this market environment, we have to go through a process of saying very publicly, we would like to buy that building. Well, it's gone before we can even put our name on the paper, because we've got to be public. We can't go around and secretly go buy this property before it's gone. So it's pretty frustrating to.
One of the practical problems with having out-of-state or out-of-the-city ownership is, so we have these we have an amazing rental subsidy program that we have partnered with the city. We raised $26 million in an endowment. So now we have this pot of subsidies that we need to go out in place in units, and so we're looking for landlords who will cooperate with us and partner with us, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what are the barriers that a landlord might have that we can, or a property owner might have, so we can overcome those. Is it a mitigation fund? Is it whatever it is? Unfortunately, so many don't live, the owners don't live in this community, so we've got to go find them, and the property managers don't have the authority to partner with us. So it's a little bit of a frustrating thing that we're trying to figure out how to overcome. If you have so many people who don't live in Charlotte and don't understand what we're trying to do here, how likely will it be that they'll want to partner with us? We're hopeful.
So you're finding that with a huge amount of people then, as far as that are.
Yeah, because we have money. We have money to place for rental subsidy programs to help put people in market rate apartments. It's just really hard to find those units right now because they're competing against the people who are moving here. Plus, they're just competing against sort of a stigma that we've got to try to overcome.
And we're going to open this up in just a few minutes for questions. So I want you to start thinking about some good ones, and we'll try to get at least 2 in. But what spurred so much of this movement on with affordable housing has, of course, been the economic mobility ranking that we came in 50 out of 50 communities. And the emphasis has been affordable housing, but what's next in this? I mean, are we doing enough around income and other areas, education, as we try to really be able to boost people out of poverty?
So what I'm really proud of is we issued the report in the spring of 2017, and one of the things that people always tell you is a task report goes up on a shelf and never gets referred to again. I think I can speak honestly and candidly that report, I see people with it all the time, dog-eared, tagged, highlighted. things that they can do. And it's not just affordable housing. Our city took the lead on housing. Our county took the lead on pre-K. So now we're moving towards universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds, plus looking at a 0 to 3 strategy as well. We've just completed some work on adolescent K-12 mental health issues. That is a huge issue that is almost has no demographic bias. I mean, it affects everyone. So we are systematically going through the recommendations of the report while thinking, again, systemically. Housing is linked to college, career, workforce, is linked to mental health, is linked to criminal justice, is linked to early childhood development. All of these things have to be considered at the same time.
I would add to that, I think the education and the information are the biggest keys to helping us move this forward. Having events like this where people are talking about affordable housing. I've been in the business for 25 plus years, and we're at a very unique time now where everybody locally at a state and national level are talking about housing at a different level and in different conversations. I think we talk about the impacts of housing on education. There's plenty of studies being done now, and it's getting that information out in front of folks and getting in bullet points, getting them to understand the small things. It's going to save us money on our health care. It's going to educate our children better. There's a recent study that said that children that live in housing credit properties do better in schools. That dispels those rumors of it's going to impact your property values, it's going to hurt your communities. No, it enhances your communities. And we've got to overcome those stigmas that have been there for so long. And we're finally at that turning point. And I think now is the time to strike while we have so many folks talking about it and continuing to have meetings like this where we can educate more folks and bring more folks into the fold so it's a broader message.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to open it up to questions. So, see. Hand up there. If you could please introduce yourself and also what organization you're with.
Pete Kelly, Equitable Communities. One of the things the mayor talked about earlier, and you all have mentioned, is making progress. We have a historical segregation in our neighborhoods. Are we going to start measuring displacement? Because what we're doing now is we're displacing the same people we moved before again. And so if we don't start to measure, we're exacerbating the issue. If you look at a lot of the neighborhoods close to downtown, we have changed the demographics of those neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And we are moving those people to other places and not close to where they historically have lived. So how do we start to measure that so we can monitor what the impact of displacement is happening in our city?
Pamela, you want to take that one, and Julie maybe chime in as well?
So the hard one. Pete, I will tell you, I don't have a good answer for how you actually measure displacement. What I will tell you is the city's focus is trying to make sure that as fast as we can, in concert with our partners, make sure that we are doing everything that we can with both our financial and our regulatory tools to build and create as many new units as possible. So one example I'll just put out there in the room, we have about 1,000 units in the pipeline right now, right? So we know that, and what that means is that the city has committed funding to over 1,000 units. We know that once that funding is committed, it takes about 18 to 24 months before those units to come out of the ground. And so, there are names being put on waiting lists, but how you actually measure displacement and where people are going, short of kind of what was done with the Hope 6 program, and my friends with Oblivion are here following those families to make sure that they land softly. I'm not sure that the city, that we have mechanisms in place to adequately do that.
I will just put a plug in that the Urban Institute is looking at this issue and looking at ways in which, and you mentioned the power of data and evidence and just sort of we have so much data now available to us, local and federal, that, and there are things that you can specifically look at to understand transition, where people are moving and migration trends and triggers for displacement, including things like, high taxes. Taxes are going up and you're starting to see people move, or, tax foreclosures and things like that. So there is some work being done to think about how to build in displacement triggers that cities can use to at least have a sense of what's happening there, where those communities are, and how you might get ahead of that.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about opportunity zones that was mentioned earlier. I mean, we know right now that those opportunity zones are in places where you have lots of affordable housing, whether it's low-income housing, tax credit deals, or just naturally occurring affordable housing. I think the opportunity within the opportunity zone is to be proactive and to really go in and create those affordable housing opportunities now, so that if displacement starts to occur from investor community or what have you, people have an option to relocate in a true affordable housing option in their area.
Sure, and a lot of these opportunity zones are already highly gentrifying zones
That's right.
to begin with,
Right.
too.
And so the goal is to be proactive about it.
And to get help at the state level, to be able to have the tools to keep people where they are.
Another question. This gentleman right here, looking around with the red tie. Is there?
Hi, my name's Kenneth Bell, and I own a small development firm, and we do mostly market rate development, but we are trying to start our first affordable home development. And the biggest challenge for us, outside of course, the things you guys have all talked about, the regulatory things and infrastructure costs and things like that, finding dirt that's affordable enough to do it, is actually, we've heard about hundreds of millions of dollars in this place and that place and the other place, but the access to it and who to speak to make sure this stuff happens. We've done a lot of research for ourselves to find people that have the people that want these homes, the requirements for them, the price that we need to get to and everything. But for us, for someone that wants to, I happen to be a black guy, so I understand gentrification. I have participated in developed neighborhoods on the west side that were once affordable. I started out in Wesley Heights for $73,000. My house sold, the last one over, for over $700,000. So I've been a part of, this whole process, but we're looking for an opportunity to possibly develop some things that at an affordable level. But to be honest with you, it's very difficult to find these resources that people are talking about that are there. And for apartment homes, I've seen that, but as a builder, it's very difficult for us to find, well, where are the resources so a developer that wants to go and do a project like this can actually access them.
So where do you go?
So I would love to talk to you more to help you understand kind of how the local housing trust fund works. I think you have an expert here with Mr. Farmer from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency that works in concert with the city's housing trust fund dollars. There's also, we have our partner LISC, who manages the Charlotte Housing Opportunity Fund. Be happy to put you in contact with that person as well. So I'll make sure I give you my contact information.
Is there one central clearinghouse that you can?
So if you go to the city's website, there is information about the low-income housing tax credit program. If you go to nchfa.org, there's information, but there's not just one central landing site.
All right. Well, thanks for covering a lot of ground in 30 minutes, and thank you to all of you for coming out and all of you for wrestling with this topic, and the Hill for organizing this. So stay dry today and stay safe.
Thank you.